Yeah. I'm
Go.
All right, so I'm Daniel Collins, and this is my informative speech for COMM-105, and it will be on the Protestant Reformation. So here we have a large panoply of the life of Martin Luther, and when I planned this speech, it was around Reformation Day, so I thought it was necessary to relate how the Protestant Reformation really shaped who we are today as a civilization. But yeah, he's sort of become a legend at this point. But I'd sort of like to separate the fact from the legend here. So, right from the beginning of Christianity, there had always been a lot of dissatisfaction with the church, going back to Jerome and Augustine. But really, the medieval church wasn't good at listening to these issues, especially by the time that the nobles of Europe had made it to higher ecclesiastical offices and started selling offices. So the first person that we can really start to think of as a Protestant, or at least a pre-Protestant, would be Peter Waldo. He founded the sect of the Vaudois, the Waldensians. He was a Frenchman who sold cloth, and he was very rich, and one day he heard a sermon, and he was so inspired by the sermon that he wanted to share the Bible with everyone else. So he and his followers, they started to memorize large portions of the Bible and share it with people and help them to interpret it rather than have evil clergymen do it. This is John Wycliffe. He translated the Bible into English and made about 10 copies, which was a lot at the time. So he, the Bible spread in the English language. This is Jan Hus. He thought that communion should be offered in both kinds to everyone, but the ecclesiastical authorities lied to him and eventually had him killed. This is Girolamo Savonarola. He advocated burning a lot of cultural artifacts as being vain, but at the same time he also critiqued the power of Rome and the inability of individual believers to have different opinions. So, in the 1510s, Pope Julius II really wanted to make Rome great again, and in doing so, he wanted to build a new St. Peter's Basilica, this giant building right here that cost, innumerable amounts of money. Where was he going to get the money from? Well, he didn't want to upset the Italians or the French. So he went to Germany, which was sort of a backwater culturally. I mean, not really, but that's how they perceived it. And so they sent Johann Tetzel to go and harvest money from the Germans. So Tetzel went around promising a lot of stuff about how money would get you into heaven, or at least help you on your way and get other people into heaven that were already dead. Stuff that isn't really indicated in the Bible at all. Luther had been reading Paul's Paul's epistles, and he had been teaching them. And he had realized that Paul really has a lot on faith and on the individual believer's participation in the church. So Luther questioned this guy, and one day he nailed a bunch of theses to the door in Wittenberg, at least theoretically, that's how the story goes, which in many ways denounced sort of the spirit of what he was saying, but not the church doctrine itself. Instead of responding in a productive way, the church sort of freaked out, and they didn't allow him to propagate his writings anymore, and they almost had him killed, but luckily the Duke of Saxony kidnapped him and kept him in his castle. And even today, a lot of Lutherans say, Luther didn't leave the church left Luther. So, not until later did Luther really have too much vitriol for the church, but that was really after the excommunication period. So, the regionalisms of the Reformation, Luther's theology specifically appealed to Germanic agrarian society, because it was based on the individual, but it also held a lot of enmity for up hierarchies, ecclesiastical authorities to some degree, and so they could relate to that. Calvin, however, he really liked cities and economic powerhouses, and he was even more individualistic than Luther, which made it more appealing to city dwellers, as it was in Switzerland. So, finally in 1555, the Treaty of Augsburg was signed, saying, "No estate shall induce another's subjects to accept his religion and abandon the others, nor shall he take those subjects under his protection or in any way defend them in such actions. This rule, however, is not intended to apply to the obligations of those who have long been subject to their Lord's rule," etc., etc. So, for the first time, it allowed people to embrace Protestantism, which many people did because they read about it because of the new printing presses. So this was a milestone in freedom of conscience and religion, although you really had to share the same religion as your prince, which was the big downside. But later Protestants would go to the Americas, and they started to believe in a society where multiple denominations could be tolerated together. And that's where we're left with today. Of course, there's a lot of Enlightenment philosophers that draw from the tradition of freedom of conscience as well, but Luther's break with the church really helped start this whole stream of thought based on the individual and the conscience of the individual. Thank you, and good night.